All right. Great. I believe that we're live. Hi, everybody. I'm 𝗑𝗶𝗴𝗵 here with your Vitality Project with our esteemed regular guest, Angela. It's wonderful to have Angela MacLeod with us.
Great to be here, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We're moving into a conversation over the next several posts about stressful situations that trigger craving and sometimes actually trigger relapse to addictive behaviors, whether it's with a substance or some other form of kind of self-medication to help regulate ourselves. And today's post is looking at what a difference it makes to have some kind of sense of purpose in one's life or meaning in one's life in order to sustain recovery from whatever our enslavements are. And all of this is meant as kind of prelude to, in fact, I invited participants today to reflect on some of those what we call high-risk situations, maybe that in the past have really thrown us for a loop in regards to our sobriety, either into cravings, triggering strong feelings that led to cravings, or maybe even into an addictive slip or relapse. So the topic is broad, but I just love to dialogue with you for a few minutes tonight, Angela.
Sure.
Really appreciate you being with us here. I'll hand the baton to you to start with and just see what your thoughts are. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, something I've done lately with your post is I'll read the title, what the title of the post is, and then I'll just see where I go with that before I read the content.
That's great.
And I know you pretty well, and I've been working with the material that you've been presenting for several years.
Yeah.
So, I can probably guess sometimes, where you might go.
I think that's true.
But I also, there's always some new stuff coming in too. So I like that aspect.
Thank you.
So yeah, when I looked at the title, How to Prepare for High-Risk Situations, I noticed the word prepare, how to prepare for. And I sort of took it as an assumption that I already know what the high-risk situations are. So I kind of jumped right, my mind just went right to what I do, what am I doing that is preparing, or that has that element of helping me to reduce the risk of, of slips or relapse. And so what came up, and I'll just mention the things, the first thing was having a daily practice where I'm practicing regulating my nervous system. I'm building skills because red alert brain is, in a different term, is a dysregulated nervous system. It's stress that we have a hard time living with, and it also it cuts us off from so much pleasure, thinking clearly, and all of that. And so for me, daily practice is many things, but one of the essences, one of the cores of it for me is building those skills that are more lasting. Because what I've noticed is that I just have a history of, trauma from childhood, and I have, I think I came into the world and didn't get the kind of the nervous system balance that might make me more resilient. And has actually predisposed me to addiction. I've read that there is a correlation for a lot of people. Therefore, making that kind of change on the nervous system level and the red alert brain, the essence of that kind of change requires regular daily practice. So I've really embraced that, and there's more to that. But the few other things came up right away, and one was developing satisfying, loving relationships with at least a few people that I trust, that I love, that I know love me. And I think it's also a feature for a lot of people who get caught up in addiction is that they get isolated, they lose connections. And so again, preparing for high-risk situations, because they come, and no matter who you are or how healthy you are. And so for me, that also is something that takes time, at least for me, I tend to be very introverted, and so cultivating these close friendships takes choosing to do that because my default mode is I just get comfortable in my solo, you know, just doing what I do, lifestyle. And then another thing was high on the list for me was meaning and purpose. And something that you've been talking about in the recent posts, and you were talking about that with Doug and with Michael
Yes,
Moran.
yes,
I
yes.
loved listening to those
Thank
two
you.
talks.
Thank you.
And you know, that is something that I experienced. And then again, it's interesting. A thread with all of these is that they take time to develop. So for those of us who've been in a long period of addiction, when we get sober and we're starting in recovery, those things I just mentioned, they're not like a quick fix, you know, like quick fix. You know, that's what the addictive personality, if that's what I could call it, is that we're looking for something quick. There can be some you know, emergency kind of first aid kind of things we can do, but to have that lasting, deeper resilience, you know, the essence for me keeps looking like different practices that I cultivate over time daily. And then the last thing on my little list was how to prepare for high risk situations, is to really be attentive to what does cause me stress in my life, and that it's a given that there's going to be stressors. Life has, you know, unexpected things happen, but there are things that we can look at in our life and we can say, oh, you know what, I'm not getting enough exercise, and that's really, that causes me to feel more stress. Or, you know, my eating is getting a little off track, you know, and that will, you know, cause more stress. Or even things like, you know, there's certain friends or people that I'm doing things with that I actually don't enjoy their company, you know, so being more selective, you know, not to put them down, but to just notice that it's not very nourishing for me. It's stressful for me to be in a social situation or maybe even a work situation. So it's kind of like an inventory, you know, of those kind of things. And then where I can make choices about environmental or social stressors to see if I can reduce those. And so that all came up for me around just the heading of the, you know, the title. And yeah, there's some other thoughts that percolated up as I read through, you know, through the rest of the posts.
Really appreciate your creativity, and I'm so impressed by the richness of what you brought to the title. I think that's great. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. I kept having this image as you were talking. It's one that we shared before, of a barrel that holds rain, and it struck me. And we laugh about this because you live in an area that has a lot of rain, and I live in an area that has very little rain. So what am I to know or say about rain barrels? But that if we can find a way to like I'm picturing like a faucet at the bottom of the barrel to, in a sense, bleed off additional water, excess water that we don't want. That's a good thing. And I think about that sometimes in terms of the practices that you and I both engage in. You know, whether it's exercise or diet or spiritual practices, journaling and dealing with emotional processes, shadow work, all of that is a way to kind of keep the system relatively, I think relatively grounded or relatively anchored is what comes to mind. And then there are times, especially for you in Northern Washington, where the rain just comes, it just comes. And the work that you've done is essential. Otherwise the rain barrel is going to overflow, but the rain comes in. And then to do what we can do to protect ourselves from too much rain. You know, I don't know, I'm imagining putting a little lean-to or a roof over the rain barrel maybe as needed. That you talked about relationships, that if I can protect myself from extraordinarily stressful relationships, ones that are habitually stressful, or for that matter, things that are related to my vocation, my work, and so on, if I can, or at least keep an eye out for them, you know. and maybe do some extra preparation. This is the time of the year of annual reporting of taxes and all of that for me. It's an annual ritual that's gone on for my entire adulthood. I find it loathsome to the extreme, most typically, for lots of different reasons. And I just know that this is a time where I probably need extra rest and extra connection with friends like you and extra quiet time to nourish my soul, because I spend a lot of hours kind of finalizing the year's bookkeeping and so on. And so if we know these things coming up, or somebody who's maybe in an interview process for a new position in a workplace, and just if we can know these things and do what psychology calls it stress inoculation, if you can kind of like preemptively, be proactive, like I know this is coming up, so what can I do? I have a client who's looking at getting married in the next few weeks. A wedding can be an incredibly stressful event. We're coming through the first year of COVID, where many of us have felt the direct experience of loss of a friend. You and I both have a shared friend that we lost during this time. It just seems like these things are things that we can hopefully, I don't mean prepare in some kind of glib way, but it's like really honor the power of some of these experiences and do what we can to create kind of ballast in our souls and in our bodies. I think all of the above, I just feel like I resonated with every single aspect of what you got out of today's title. You had some other comments, and I'd invite you to share. I'd love to hear, Angela. Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can remember. Well, there was one that's, I don't know how well formulated it is, and so because I mean, this is an alive, engaged process. As I read something, something is like, oh, what is this response is coming up, and so I just actually minutes before we got on here, something was kind of grabbing my attention, and I'm going to see if I can pull it up. I think part of what you wrote was where you said that a meaningful life is both the means to and the end goal of a long-term recovery. So let me just pause here for a second. Well, I think I wrote that down because I liked it a lot. And then it was actually right after that where you wrote, I shortened it a little bit. Only when we identify what we most want in life, only then does our managing challenges that come up in life assume genuine importance. I think that's what it was. And so that really, that made me aware that I often automatically think of challenges, difficulties as, oh, this is a bad thing. I'm like already kind of, protecting myself or worrying, how am I going to deal with this? I'm overwhelmed or something like that. Yes. But there is a shift happening for me where dealing with adversities sometimes reveals that it's actually part of my purpose. And so I'm trying to think of an example. I have one it's a work situation where there's some difficulty, there's some stress, there's some things that are coming up that are complicated and that bring to my awareness questions of my own values and ethics and how do I want to be involved in this or should I not? And it was stressful. So, because I wanted to be involved and I didn't, and many complicated things. And so maybe my old pattern would be basically to freeze or to run away from it, just to find an excuse or, this is just too much. I can't figure this out. But I've been feeling more resilient, and in the way that's manifesting in this situation is that I'm asking myself to not just do the automatic bolt or shut down and blame or, judge and create reasons why this isn't going to work. But to sit with it and to ask myself, what is it that I value? What is it showing me that is important to me, that's meaningful? So back to that topic of what's meaningful to me. And now it's in a relational mode with more than one person. So how can I hold to what I feel is my values in this
Yes.
situation, stay engaged in a way that doesn't have me crossing my own values, and 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 veer away from judging other people, because it's one thing to say, in my mind, it's one thing to say, okay, this is a person I don't really want to work with for whatever reason. But it's another thing for me to say, oh, that person is that way and that's bad,
Yes.
like, and that is all that they are. And so in this situation, there are some people doing some things that my reflex would be, oh, that they're bad, that's bad. It sounds pretty childish, but that's an easy way to put it. But what I realize is that some of these people, they do wonderful things. They have gifts, they're giving in ways that are incredible. And so what I realized is that in this situation, my purpose was combining with the challenging. It's actually high risk for me because it's stressful.
Yes.
But it would mean that if I did step away, then I would lose connection. And so how is this adverse situation? Is it potentially a place where I can bring my own values and my sense of purpose and look at them together? This is new, so I think it's kind of muddled the way I'm explaining it, but it just feels like a different way of holding adversity and challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really respect the integrity that you're talking about. It's so much easier, as you and I have talked about over the years, to move into a black and white, either or kind of, binary type of split in a sense, and to hold what look like opposing forces, or even to look at meaning and adversity in the same space, is really challenging and really admirable to me. Really. I'll tell you one thing that came up for me. In fact, I have it right here. It came up for me as you were talking. My doctoral dissertation all those years ago, I did an odd thing. Well, I spent a year just reading everything I could find on mindfulness meditation. That was about 1983, and there was a fair bit of literature, and I read a lot that year. And I felt like I cared a lot about it. It was relatively new at mindfulness practice, but I felt like if I spend, I felt like it'll come clear to me what I want to study if I just study it. So that's what I did. I just trusted that. And after a year of reading 50 books and hundreds of articles, it became clear to me what hadn't been studied, and I was interested to study it. And so it was interesting in the literature is that there'd been relatively little work done, particularly, zero work, I think, from a psychological perspective, to look at what happens when you practice meditation of any type. I was looking at mindfulness practice as one example.
Mhm.
What happens if you have experiences that don't feel good? And what I did in my dissertation is I separated out the language, and you just reminded me of it. It's been a long time since I've thought of it this way. I focused on what I called unpleasant experiences in my dissertation, and I interviewed subjects across the span in terms of experience with meditation. Some were novices, some had decades, tens of thousands of hours of experience, so just a huge range. And I had questions, and I was looking at this phenomenon of unpleasant experiences, and not only how it manifests, but how is it understood or experienced, depending on how deeply developed you are in this meditative tradition. But there was a distinction I made in the dissertation, and I picked up the language somewhat from the language of psychology. As I said, I'm making a distinction between unpleasant experiences on the one hand, which are universal, and adverse reactions. And that was actually the term I used, adverse reactions. So for example, there's a small subset of people, relatively, that when they meditate, it's really contraindicated because it will evoke really like a pathological reaction, I guess. And I call that adverse reaction. And it was, and the idea, well, I'll tell you what happened in the dissertation in a nutshell. It's 400 pages, but I can tell you about the sentence, is the further people, the more advanced that people got in meditation. And the model that I was working from, which was from Ken Wilber at that point, this is many years ago, predicted that as people get further down the path, that they'll do what you're doing right now, which is they'll interpret so-called unpleasant experiences, and they'll wrap it into decades or thousands of hours of meditation, which means that they might not necessarily turn away from the unpleasantness. They might be with it, and be with it in a very sophisticated way by virtue of the depth of their spirituality, and I should say psychological development too. And that those that were beginning would have a different interpretation. It wasn't meant to rank order, or it was just looking at, is it possible to look at this across time? And that's what I did. It was a looking at this across populations. And so I feel like you're a living example of it right now, is looking at what in the past you and I might have looked at only in terms of adversity. And it's not to minimize that it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Things that happen, like the situation you just described. And it's trying to figure out a way to navigate that in such a way that it doesn't turn into an adverse situation for you psychologically and spiritually, or even systemically within the organization that you're talking about. At the same time, and this is where it gets really interesting to me, is how can you look at that through the lenses, the eyes of your own growth process, you know, your own kind of unfolding integrity. How can you look at that as meaningful? How can you look at that as purposeful? And I think that's incredible. I think I would wish that anybody who has eyes to hear, eyes to see, and ears to hear, I wish they could hear and review what you just said, because every one of us faces this, and there are certain situations. I like very much what Rumi says. He says, many demolitions are actually renovations. You know, it depends on how we look at it. Yeah, this doesn't feel good, but this could be renovating something. That's not exactly what you're talking about. I'm hoping and praying this isn't a demolition that we're talking about, but I definitely see how you're moving into this as an opportunity for keeping your eyes open, taking care of yourself, setting boundaries, and learning and growing. And that's completely honorable in my view.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels like that.
Yeah.
That's great to hear about your dissertation. And
sometimes we grow into these things. I wrote the dissertation when I was in my late 20s, and it's nearly 40 years later, and I think my dissertation is making better sense to me now. I'm the age of some of those that I interviewed in this dissertation, and I can remember one woman in particular sitting on the steps of Claremont, University of Claremont, as she shared with me her experience of what we're talking about, and she was in her 60s, and I remember, and I was 27, 28. I remember just weeping as I listened to her, because I was so moved. I could feel the depth of what she was saying, and I was also very clear that I wouldn't be able to manifest that. I hadn't lived long enough or deeply enough, maybe suffered enough. Certainly didn't have the consciousness you did. So you can recognize that she's at a whole different level, and it moved me to tears. I haven't ever forgotten that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, I know that we're running low on time. I want to allow you, if you have any maybe summarizing thoughts or anything. I just feel like this is so rich. I hope anybody that catches this will really focus on what you shared there, because I think anybody can relate to it. And there's a way that you're moving through this that has really, it's really inspiring.
I do have one closing thought, and it's very brief, but it came to mind. And I really love this because it was a golden nugget, a golden piece of wisdom that I heard from a fellow member of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, in a meeting.
Wonderful.
And I was listening to him talk about some really difficult stuff going on in his life. And it surprised me, and I sort of got it in this one sentence. He said, "So I'm looking at this to see, how is it an opportunity to grow spiritually?" Like what he described was really, just something horrific in his life. And, my mind would be going, well, you need to leave, or you need to tell that person this, or, so I was looking at, how to fix it. And, but to hear him say that, there's that one thing, it still echoes in my mind at different points in my life. And I'm very grateful that he said that at that time. It was a good thing for me to hear, and I feel like that's part of what we're talking about here.
In
a nutshell.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Say it one more time, if you don't mind, Angela.
To look at the situation, the adverse situation, and ask myself, how is this an opportunity to grow spiritually?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I wrap around to the title for today, how to prepare for high-risk situations. I can't think of a deeper preparation than what you're talking about that you learned that day from that man. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's a beautiful place to finish for today. We're not really finished because we're never really finished, but I think it's a beautiful place to punctuate today. I really thank you for what you shared. I think it's really potent, really powerful. I hope others can find the golden nuggets in what you shared today. Thank you so much, Angela. Thanks for this time.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Blessings to you. I hope you have a good evening and a good weekend, and to all of our listeners as well. All right. Take care. Good night for now.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.